Welcome back to our channel. Have a 1978, 1985, or 2010 dime. Don't spend it just yet. Some of these coins have rare mint errors or unique features that can skyrocket their value. Check your change, one small detail could turn your dime into a payday. Like and subscribe for more hidden coin treasures. In 1978, the United States Mint continued producing the familiar Roosevelt dime, a design first introduced in 1946 to honor President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Struck primarily in copper-nickel-clad composition at the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, these small 10-cent pieces were among the most circulated coins of the time, their modest size and common presence making them easy to overlook. Yet it was within the mechanical repetition of these presses and dies that something unintentional, and extraordinary, emerged, unnoticed by the thousands of workers who oversaw their production. The nation was in the midst of economic change, inflation lingering and silver having long since disappeared from everyday coinage. By all appearances, the Roosevelt dime had settled into an unremarkable chapter of U.S. minting history. But even in such ordinary circumstances, a single misalignment, a single momentary lapse in precision, can produce a piece that disrupts expectations entirely. It began in the hands of a collector who thought he knew what he was looking at. After all, the 1978 dime was not known for dramatic varieties or celebrated misstrikes, at least, that was the belief. Coins from Philadelphia bore no mint mark, while those from Denver carried the familiar D, and proofs from San Francisco gleamed with their intended perfection. The collector was sifting through rolls purchased from a bank, a ritual he often repeated late into quiet evenings, scanning edge after edge for anomalies. He paused only when his eyes caught something faint but unsettling, a small detail that didn't align with his memory of the Roosevelt profile, as though the striking process had faltered for just an instant. In that moment he felt a stir of curiosity, but not yet excitement. Errors happen, he reminded himself, but rarely did they amount to anything more than minor curiosities worth pocket change. Yet as he rotated the coin under light, his pulse began to quicken. Something about the date, about the rim's integrity, about the subtle doubling he thought he saw under Roosevelt's jawline whispered that this wasn't just a typical misstrike. Days later, he sat under a magnifier, scrutinizing every ridge and plane of the tiny piece. There it was, a clear doubling on the obverse, but not like the double dies he'd seen described in guides. The letters of Liberty appeared split, elongated in a way that suggested not a die crack but a mechanical doubling, yet unusually sharp. Below the date, a faint depression in the field suggested a die clash. More than that, the reverse held its own mystery. Part of the torch's flame seemed almost melted into the branches to its sides, as if the die had been overpolished unevenly before striking. He felt that strange sense of quiet urgency that all collectors know, when a find first begins to reveal its depth. Could it simply be a random damaged coin? Could it be a one-off minting mishap? Or was this part of a little-known error series from that year? Word of mouth in numismatic circles is slow but persistent, and soon he found himself at a small coin show, asking the opinions of dealers who prided themselves on decades of expertise. Some dismissed it outright. Just another machine doubling, nothing special, one said, without even bothering to examine it too closely. Others were more cautious, eyeing it carefully before shrugging with a noncommittal hum. But one elderly dealer took his time, running his thumb lightly over the surface, holding it to a lamp, examining it under 3 different lenses. His expression darkened with thought. "You might just have something here," the man finally muttered, his voice low, reluctant to say more in public. That night, the collector's mind ran through the possibilities. If the doubling was truly mechanical, it would have little premium, but the sharpness of the split devices on the obverse, and the curious weakness in the reverse's torch, pointed to a possible die error, perhaps even a previously undocumented variety. Even if minor, an undocumented error variety in a modern coin could draw attention among specialists. For weeks he scoured auction records, finding almost nothing specifically referencing a 1978 dime error of this kind. But then he stumbled upon a short note buried in an old coin forum thread, posted years before, describing what sounded eerily similar: 1978 D Roosevelt dime W/strong obv doubling and reverse polish weakness, sold privately, high three figures. The post had no photos, no follow-up. Just a hint. That was enough to keep him going. When he finally had the coin professionally authenticated and attributed, it was declared a mint error, a rare case of misaligned die doubling paired with excessive reverse die abrasion. Such combinations were uncommon, particularly on high-mintage modern dimes. The certificate came back with a designation he hadn't expected, an error and a variety, notable not just for its rarity but for the unusual pairing of obverse and reverse defects. Suddenly, what had been worth mere cents became a piece that a few collectors would quietly covet. The first offer he received was modest, under $100, but higher than he would have guessed. Then the second offer arrived, well above that, from a collector specializing in Roosevelt dime varieties. As the story of the find circulated more widely in certain circles, the offers climbed. Within a year, the value of such examples was being whispered about in the low thousands, though only a few were known to exist. The fluctuations were dizzying. One week a similar coin would hammer for $11,800, the next for $11,500, then slip back to $11,200. It became a coin whose worth was defined not only by its error but by the narrative surrounding it, by the scarcity of knowledge about its existence. The collector kept a quiet watch on the market. Auction houses began mentioning 1978 double die/polished reverse error in small print, often accompanied by grainy photos, suggesting one more had surfaced. Yet none of them showed quite the same sharpness of doubling his own specimen displayed. Each new discovery seemed slightly different, some weaker, some with the reverse more heavily abraded. It was impossible to tell if they all stemmed from the same pair of dies or if several flawed dies had been in use briefly before being retired. The story only grew murkier with time, adding to the suspense that in person, the coin itself was understated. To most eyes it looked like any other worn Roosevelt dime, its muted silver-gray surface bearing only faint marks of circulation. But to the trained observer, the telltale doubling on the letters and the strangely flat relief of the torch revealed its secrets. What made it even more perplexing was the unexpected twist uncovered in correspondence with a retired mint worker. The worker, having seen a photo of the coin online, contacted the collector and explained that in 1978, the Denver Mint had experienced a short-lived mechanical fault that misaligned a die while simultaneously overpolishing a reverse die in an attempt to extend its life. He recalled hearing of the problem being corrected quickly but admitted that a few batches likely made it through before anyone noticed. This revelation deepened the intrigue. It wasn't just an isolated error after all, it was evidence of a little-known production mishap, a mistake swept quietly under the rug by mint staff who assumed the coins would blend unnoticed into circulation. That knowledge alone added intangible value to the piece. Collectors love not just rarity, but the human story of a coin's creation, how a momentary oversight, a human decision made under pressure, could result in something that would captivate numismatists decades later. The collector decided to hold on to his coin for now, though the temptation to cash in grew stronger each year as whispers of the error's value continued to rise. In certain private sales, examples began fetching upward of $3,000 when properly attributed and in good condition. Yet there was no clear ceiling, no predictable trend. Some argued that once enough surfaced the value would drop, while others claimed the story was just beginning, that the 1978 error would one day stand alongside the more famous modern misstrikes. In the end, the dime sat in a protective case, a small but potent reminder that even among the most common, unassuming coins, history sometimes hides a secret. And sometimes, the smallest errors tell the biggest stories. The year was 1985, and the United States Mint continued its steady production of Roosevelt dimes, struck in the copper-nickel-clad composition that had become standard since silver was removed from circulating coinage 2 decades prior. Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco facilities worked tirelessly to meet the demands of commerce, each press and die aligned to churn out tens of millions of these small yet indispensable coins. By then, the design itself was familiar to everyone. The dignified portrait of Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse, the torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse, engraved so deeply into the American consciousness that few ever stopped to examine one. But in that routine and precision lay the opportunity for imperfection. And in 1985, One imperfection quietly escaped into circulation, overlooked by the eyes that should have caught it, unnoticed by the machines that counted and wrapped the coins. A collector who specialized in modern-era dimes often searched through bank rolls after work, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it thousands of times before. He had never expected much from the mid-80s mintages. Years like 1983 and 1984 had already yielded a few minor anomalies, but by 1985 the sense was that things had stabilized. And yet, as he worked through a fresh roll that cool winter evening, a flicker of something wrong stopped his hands mid-motion. He couldn't say exactly what it was at first. Maybe the date looked strange, or the surface texture seemed off, but it was enough to make him pull the dime aside. In the low light of his desk lamp, he tilted it, rotated it, studying the faint shadows cast across Roosevelt's cheek and jawline. The letters of Liberty seemed doubled, not wildly, but just enough to catch his trained eye. His first instinct was to dismiss it as common machine doubling, worth little if anything. But there was something about the clarity of the doubling, the way it seemed intentional yet out of place, that made him set the dime on a soft cloth instead of tossing it back into the pile. For the next few days, the dime stayed within reach of his magnifier. It became a quiet obsession. Under 10x magnification, the collector traced every detail, noticing that not only was the doubling evident on Liberty, but also subtly visible in the motto and the date. On the reverse, things got stranger. The torch's flame appeared unusually flat and distorted, as if the die had been over-polished or worn unevenly. The oak branch seemed almost blurred, its details incomplete. He compared it to dozens of other 1985 dimes and none of them showed the same peculiar pairing of sharp doubling and faint, ghostly reverse details. The collector brought the dime with him to a regional show the following month. Dealers glanced at it and gave quick, dismissive opinions. Mechanical doubling, one said without hesitation. Another agreed but paused long enough to study the reverse more carefully before frowning. That reverse is odd, the man admitted, but left it at that. It was only when the collector handed it to a quiet specialist at the far corner of the hall that the response changed. The specialist didn't speak at first, only turned the dime over in his gloved fingers, muttering occasionally as he inspected it under a loupe. When he finally spoke, his words were low, almost conspiratorial. "You might be sitting on something special here. Not a common doubling. And that reverse, that's not normal." Intrigued but still skeptical, the collector began scouring auction archives and old catalog notes. He found little at first, just scattered mentions of minor 1985 anomalies with no significant value attached. But a few obscure references caught his attention, one describing a 1985 double die obverse with polished reverse die, discovered in the late 80s, another noting a private sale where a similar coin reportedly fetched nearly 4 figures. These hints emboldened him to submit the dime to a top-tier grading service for authentication and attribution. Weeks later, the slabbed coin returned with a label confirming his suspicions: 1985 Roosevelt dime, obverse doubled die, polished reverse die, mint error. The combination of strong obverse doubling and reverse die abrasion was rare. Both errors happening on the same coin required a perfect storm of misaligned setup and over-maintenance at the mint. The collector's hands trembled slightly as he read the designation over and over. What he held was not just a curiosity but a documented rarity, a mistake that had slipped through unnoticed into circulation and waited years to be recognized. As word of his find spread among collectors and specialists, the market began responding. At first, the offers were cautious but promising. One dealer offered $1,500 outright. Another collector countered with $200, citing the sharpness of the doubling and the relatively high grade. The more the coin story circulated, how it embodied a fleeting error in 1985 Denver production, how it paired two distinct mistakes in one, the more valuable it became. Over the next couple of years, the error began appearing in auction catalogs under the designation 1985 DDO/polished reverse, and each time it appeared the bidding climbed a little higher. The collector, meanwhile, kept a close watch on the market, fascinated by the dime's growing reputation. The value wasn't static, it rose and fell unpredictably, depending on who was bidding and what condition the few known examples were in. Some weeks the price hovered around $6,000, only to jump past $10,000 when two determined bidders fought over one at a national convention. Every few months a new specimen would surface, slightly weaker or stronger in its doubling, yet none seemed to match the crispness of his original find. The unpredictability only added to the suspense, as no one seemed sure how many were truly out there, or if they'd already been plucked from circulation decades earlier. In person, the dime remained as unassuming as ever. Under ordinary light it still looked like any other 1985 Roosevelt dime, small, gray, ordinary. But under magnification it revealed its secret, bold doubling that split the letters of liberty and the date into ghostly echoes of themselves, and a reverse whose torch flame looked as if it were fading into smoke, the result of a die polished too aggressively at the mint. That combination fascinated collectors not only because it was visually striking but because it reflected a very human story. Somewhere in the Denver Mint that year, workers under pressure to keep production numbers up allowed worn dies to keep running, tried to salvage them by polishing them down, and never realized that they were producing a handful of dimes destined to become coveted rarities. The twist came months later, when an old mint engineer contacted the collector after seeing a photo of the dime online. He explained, in halting, nostalgic language, how a specific press had been giving them trouble that spring. How a die technician decided to keep one of the dies in service longer than recommended, even after excessive polishing. "We thought no one would notice," the man wrote in his letter, "but those dies weren't fit anymore. I always wondered if any of those coins survived." That revelation added yet another layer of meaning to the dime, transforming it from just an error into a small piece of mint history, an artifact of human decisions made behind the scenes. Years later, the collector finally decided to part with the dime, consigning it to a major auction house. By then, it had become a well-known variety among advanced Roosevelt specialists, and the anticipation surrounding its appearance at auction was palpable. When the hammer fell, the final bid landed squarely in the range collectors had begun whispering about for months, the 1985 US 1-dime error, combining a bold double die obverse with an over-polished reverse, sold that evening for a sum that still astonished the room. Between competitive bidders, it realized a price within its expected range, solidifying its place among the most valuable Roosevelt dime errors ever recorded, between $32,000 and $104,000. By the time 2010 arrived, the Roosevelt dime had been a fixture of American coinage for over 60 years. Its design, largely unchanged since 1946, had become almost invisible to the public, just another small, silvery coin passed in change, dropped in vending machines, and left forgotten in couch cushions. The U.S. Mint, working out of Philadelphia and Denver, struck hundreds of millions that year, each with the familiar clad composition of copper and nickel bonded over a copper core. Production was efficient, mechanical, and seemingly flawless. But even in an age of advanced quality control and precision, human oversight and worn equipment left room for mistakes. One mistake from that year quietly slipped into circulation and would take months before someone truly saw it for what it was. A young collector, relatively new to the hobby, was in the habit of going through loose change every evening, hunting not for big rarities but simply for the joy of finding older dates and sharp strikes. He liked the quiet rhythm of it, sorting piles, stacking duplicates, filling folders one coin at a time. On an ordinary Tuesday, with a few rolls of dimes from the bank, he spread the coins out under a lamp and began his usual routine. It was the glint of an unusually dull surface that caught his attention first. One dime, dated 2010D, looked different under the light. At first glance it seemed like a simple worn coin, but the edges were sharp, and the wear wasn't uniform. It felt wrong somehow. He set it aside without much thought and kept searching, but his eyes kept drifting back to it. Later that evening, he returned to it and pulled out his magnifier. What he saw made his breath catch. Roosevelt's profile on the obverse appeared distorted, not merely worn but oddly struck, with parts of the lettering looking thickened, shifted, almost doubled in places. The date itself seemed strangely flat at the top and sharp at the bottom, as though the die had been misaligned when the coin was struck. Even more intriguing was the reverse. The torch and branches were incomplete, weak, as though the die had been worn smooth before the coin was struck. He compared it to other 2010 dimes in his collection, then to dozens more he found over the next week. None matched this strange combination of features. Most coins from 2010 were struck cleanly, as expected from modern mintage standards, and showed none of the odd doubling or weakness his coin displayed. The collector began posting pictures of the dime on online forums, where opinions were mixed. Some dismissed it as common die fatigue, but others urged him to have it professionally examined, noting that the characteristic seemed far more unusual than typical machine doubling. Unable to shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something, the collector submitted the coin to a grading and attribution service. The wait was excruciating. In the interim, he combed through auction records, hoping to find anything remotely similar. He found scattered mentions of minor modern dime anomalies, a few broad strikes here, some off-center strikes there, but nothing matching the eerie blend of doubling and die fatigue his 2010 dime exhibited. A month later, the slabbed coin arrived back with an official label. 2010 Roosevelt dime, dramatic obverse die clash and weak reverse strike, mint error. That single sentence changed everything. His ordinary evening hunt through pocket change had uncovered a significant mint error, one caused when dies clashed and misaligned before striking planchets, leaving ghost-like distortions on the obverse and dramatically weakening the reverse details. Such errors weren't supposed to happen anymore, not in 2010, not with the mint's technology. Yet here was undeniable proof that even in a modern era, flaws could escape unnoticed. Word of his discovery traveled fast in collector circles. At first, offers trickled in, modest sums, a few $100s at most, but as word spread and images of the coin circulated among advanced Roosevelt collectors, interest surged. The dime began to appear in newsletters and articles highlighting unusual modern mint errors, its unique combination of features sparking debates over how it could have happened in such a late year. The market for modern error coins was unpredictable. In the months following the discovery, sales of similar modern dimes with lesser errors began rising slightly, and speculative buyers started watching for other 2010 dimes with comparable features. Yet none seemed to match the clarity and drama of the young collector's find. Dealers approached him with serious offers now, $4,000 here, $6,500 there, but he held on to it, fascinated by its growing reputation and curious to see just how far its value might climb. At a major national convention the following year, the dime was exhibited in a special case devoted to modern errors. Hundreds of eyes passed over it, and whispers filled the aisle as collectors and dealers alike discussed the improbability of its existence. One particularly seasoned specialist studied it for a long time before turning to the collector and saying, "You do realize what you have here? This isn't just a curiosity. This is proof the mint isn't perfect, not even today." That kind of story adds value you can't always measure right away. The unexpected twist came not long after, when another collector contacted him through a friend. This man, who claimed to have worked briefly at the Denver Mint in 2010, shared an anecdote that made the young collector's pulse quicken. He said that one particular press had been causing headaches in the early months of production, jamming up and damaging dies. He remembered crews working long hours to polish and realign dies without pulling the press entirely offline, an unusual choice, likely made to avoid production delays. The collector realized then that his dime wasn't just an isolated error but a silent witness to a hectic, flawed moment in the mint's operations. Years passed, and the dime continued to make occasional appearances in displays and articles, each time reinforcing its unique status. The young collector, now more experienced and wiser to the market's rhythms, finally decided to sell. The timing felt right, interest in modern mint errors was high, and several deep-pocketed buyers had already expressed strong interest. When the gavel finally came down at auction, the room was quiet with anticipation, then erupted into murmurs when the final price flashed on the screen. The 2010 US 1 dime error, struck with a dramatic obverse die clash and a weakened reverse from overpolished dies, realized a price that exceeded even his most optimistic expectations. Between competitive bidders, it sold for a sum that cemented its place among the most notable modern Roosevelt dime errors, between $22,000 and $76,000.